Update. Am I overreacting? Wife refuses to take her allergies seriously, so I kicked her out. Last night, my 33M wife, 33F, came home from work and pulled out a container of something I wasn't familiar with, and she sat down to eat. She works at a grocery store, so I normally don't think too much about it, but when I got a whiff of it, it smelled like crab salad. Now, for context, wife has a pretty intense allergy to green and red onions, but is fine with yellow and white onions. Now, in America, we do have ingredients listed on package, which is required by law. However, companies are allowed to be vague with certain ingredients, and onions are one of those. Normally, if I spot onions listed as an ingredient, it's a hard pass for me. I don't even chance it. My wife, however, doesn't do this. Back to last night. I got up and asked to see the container, which was half gone at this point, and read the ingredient list. Onions, plain as day, were listed towards the top of the ingredients. I asked her if she bothered to read the ingredients, and she said she did, but assumed they were the safe ones. At this point, I grabbed the EpiPen from her purse, which I feel the need to add, but she only started carrying an EpiPen and Benadryl because I badgered her for a couple years about it when we started dating and kept it close by. I was upset at because I used to work in a kitchen, and I know damn well that green onions and seafood are almost inseparable in those salads. But I kept a calm demeanor and just watched her. Within a few minutes, she started having a reaction. At first, I wanted to give her the Epi because she had eaten so much, but she refused and said she would just take some Benadryl and lay down on the couch. Eventually, she needed to be given the EpiPen, and I drove her to the ER. Keep in mind this is taking place at about 12 a.m., and I work at 8 a.m. We get to the ER and they admit her. They tell me that she needs to stay overnight for observation because of how severe her reaction is, and I talk to my wife about it. We know the staff here pretty well, and I know she is in good hands, so I check with her to see if she would be okay if I went home to get some sleep before work. She said it would be totally fine. However, as I was leaving, I chose to call her mom and ask if my wife could spend the next couple of days at her house. You see, I was furious with her at this moment because I felt like I am the only one who takes the allergies seriously, and I am not the one who will literally die if I eat the wrong onions. And this isn't the first time she has been careless and ended up needing to go to the hospital because she had a reaction. There have been many times before where she just ate first, asked questions later, and it frustrates me to no end that she doesn't take it seriously enough to take a few moments to read the ingredients and just avoid onions she cannot plainly identify. So since I wasn't getting through to her, and the hospital visits seemed to be ignored as well, I decided that making her stay at her mother's for a few days might send the message. I got home, packed her a suitcase for the next few days, and when I got the call that she was being discharged at 7 this morning, I picked her up and drove her to her mother's house. I told her as I was dropping her off that this wasn't permanent, but I needed a couple of days to cool down and she needed to be monitored anyway since she just got out of the hospital, so this was the best course of action. She cried a lot, begged me to take her home instead, but I refused to budge. Her mom brought her inside and I told her that I would be blocking my wife's calls for the day while at work, so if there was an emergency that she would need to get a hold of me. Her mom agreed and told me that this was probably the best idea since she was just as frustrated that her daughter seemed to not be taking this seriously. So here I am now, at work, and feeling like I might be overreacting by kicking her out for the next few days. Did I? Edit. So I realized after reading a few responses that I might seem a little heartless here, so I want to clear a few things up. I am only blocking her calls during work because it's a double shift, and I need to be fully attentive to my work. And since I didn't get any sleep, it's going to be challenging enough as is. If there is something serious, her mother can and will call me. Second, I packed her favorite things and am having her favorite dinner sent to her mom's house tonight so she is well cared for and not just being abandoned. I would never just abandon her, and my frustration comes from a fear of losing her to something as avoidable as an allergic reaction. I also picked up an additional shift for tomorrow to make up for the time she is missing from work so she won't have to worry about the missing hours. I am and will always support her, but this is somewhat of an intervention for her as well. Now for the update. It's been a wild week and I have the time to finally sit down and update y'all on what's been going on. So after dropping her off at her mother's house last week, she actually started having a secondary reaction and needed to return to the hospital for observation. They kept her overnight and closely monitored her to make sure she wasn't getting worse. I visited her after work, and we talked for a long while about everything. She immediately apologized to me for everything that had happened and opened up to me about what has been going on. My wife has been struggling with a lot mentally. She tends to get sick easily, and up until a couple of years ago, she was dealing with gastroparesis, so for a long time she was chronically ill. But as soon as she cleared one hurdle, another would pop up and she would struggle again. The past few weeks she has been struggling a lot with feeling like she isn't in control of her life. She was let go from her last 2 jobs because of downsizing. And so this was like a minor form of rebellion. Normally if she has a reaction, she could take some Benadryl and be okay. So she told me she thought this would be the same thing. I reminded her that the past few times we had to go to the ER, and she told me she had forgotten about those incidents. She looked genuinely shocked. She couldn't remember these incidents, so I believe she didn't. We did speak with a mental health specialist, and she told us that she felt confident that my wife wasn't suicidal, but that she was dealing with a lot, and reminded her that she needs to talk about what's going on. My wife acknowledged this and promised to do better with it. She was discharged and sent home with a short-term prescription for some steroids to help, and I took her back home. The next couple of days for her were hard. The steroids made her feel miserable, and she repeatedly told me that this was definitely the worst she has felt in a long time. I sympathized, but also reminded her that this was pretty avoidable. She made a commitment to be more careful again, and later I was able to see that she was serious. We went out to shop for Thanksgiving as we were still planning on hosting before all this happened. And when I tell you that watching my wife meticulously reading each ingredient label almost made me cry, I mean it. My wife isn't the kind of person to make empty promises, but seeing her actually being proactive made me so happy inside. When we passed the seafood section, she flipped off the crabs, and I laughed harder than I have in a long time. Thanksgiving came and went with no problems, and honestly, I noticed my wife appeared to be a lot happier than she had been. When I mentioned this after dinner was over, she admitted that she felt like a large weight was lifted off her shoulders when we had our talk in the hospital about her mental state, and she felt silly keeping all of her worries inside for so long. I ended up showing her my post, and she actually was receptive to it. She did mention that some of the commenters are a little mean, and the one about me getting a vasectomy was hilariously unhinged, but overall was a good sport. So we are doing well overall now. We want to thank everyone who reached out, and all the commenters who were genuinely trying to be helpful. You were a source of grounding for me when things were spiraling out of control. Story 2. Updated. My best friend is dating my abuser and wants me to reconcile with him, so I kicked her out of my home. I've tried to write this out for days now, but I keep getting too upset to concentrate, so this might be a bit jumpy. I don't have family in the sense many understand family to be, so I've been pretty much a loner with one exception. My best friend Tammy. We met in middle school and just became joined at the hip. Things changed a bit in college. My parents forced me into a Christian out-of-state college. Tammy applied and got accepted to the other college in the town, so we both went out there and were roommates for 2 of the years before I met my first ever boyfriend. I will call him Trent. I moved in with him the end of junior year, and I don't know when it started happening, but he went from charming and affectionate to controlling. I don't wish to upset anyone, so I will hit the pause button and warn you that below is some of the things he did for me to label him abusive. He would put me down and hint he could find someone better, or that if he cheats, it will be my fault since I wasn't this or that enough. It started to get physical senior year. At first it was him pushing me out of the way if he was walking by and I was in the path for whatever reason. Then he would slap me in arguments calling me worthless, a waste of his time and young years, a broken toy no one will love. I didn't have any real self-esteem, so I stayed, thinking I was the problem. And when I called home about it, I was told that the problem was me. I started to make my exit plan the day after I graduated. He had proposed, and I hesitated, and he screamed at me to ask why. Then her swung and punched the wall right next to my head. I fell to the floor in fear, and he tried to comfort me, and basically forced me into sex. When I woke up the next morning, the ring was on my finger, and he forced me again and later called it make-up sex, saying he forgave me for the way I treated him. That is the extremely short explanation, but there are so many stories of him forcing me into bed, hitting me or threatening to kill me, and more. So I started to make a plan. I found a shelter in the city nearby. I started hiding things in the trunk of my car. I was in the service industry then, and so I would take more shifts whenever I could, and hide my cash tips in a box of tampons in my purse. And I finally was ready and left him, left my phone, I had a new cheap one, and never went back. Tammy knew him and lived near us, but she didn't know about my plan. She messaged me on social media, and I told her what happened. All of what happened. So she played dumb when he came around asking where I was, spinning the story that I was suicidal and he is calling the police to find me. He never found me. That was years ago. I am now 36, and Tammy is too. Trent is 38. Tammy became a bit religious, but I told her as long as she is happy and safe, I don't care what she leans on in faith. She started to invite me out to her church 4 years ago, and I kept saying no until I very firmly said, if she brought it up again, I would just walk out or hang up. I'm not against anyone believing what they want. I just don't want or need to be sucked into it. I honestly do not mean any offense to anyone of any faith. I myself am just agnostic, and if that ever will change, I will decide on my own, but I doubt it will. She got a job 2 years ago overseas. I acted excited for her, and but I was also deeply devastated. Without her, I had no one else. By this time, I wasn't in contact much with family, and I do have surface-level friends, but no one that's known me in the real sense. I worked it out with my counselor and just carried on. We stayed in touch online and video chatted a lot. She would show me London and I would show her my transition to moving to Texas. We would chronicle our explorations of our new cities, and then one day it started to slow down on her end, right around the time she went to visit a friend in our old college town. She then asked if she flew to Texas sometime this summer, could she stay with me a few days, and I excitedly agreed. So early this month, just a few weeks ago, she came here. She was off the whole first day, but I figured she was tired. Then the next day, we went out and got drunk. She started to cry, and I got us an Uber back to my place and asked her what was wrong. That's when she asked me not to hate her and told me everything. She's with Trent. She's been with him almost a year. I was too stunned to even say anything, and she went on and on about how it's not what I think, and he has changed. She told me he found Jesus and turned his life around, and deeply regrets the way he treated me. The more she talked, the more I just shut off. I didn't even have it in me to feel anger. I just stared at her frozen as she talked until she said, "Please, just say something." So I did. I told her to get the fuck out. She started to explain it all again. She hated him forever, but they kept running into each other. He goes to church and showed he has changed, blandy blandy blah. I didn't interrupt her, but when she stopped talking again, I just repeated myself. She argued more, and I would just listen and repeat until she grabbed her stuff and left. It was silent between us for a week until my dad texted me that Tammy called my parents crying and told me to get over myself after all. It's not like I wanted to get back with him, right? And that's what I get for living with a man I wasn't married to. Then she texted the next week, rehashing her argument and pretty much demanding I video chat with him to see for myself that he's changed and forgive him. She then blamed me that they can't take the next steps in their relationship because I don't have a forgiving heart and that I was malicious when I kicked her out. I've spent all of this week trying to figure out if I am insane to think this is a huge betrayal, a deal breaker. I mean, who even dates their friend's ex, for one? But this? I blocked her after she hinted that my version of things was exaggerated and malicious, but I don't have other friends to turn to about this. I don't think I am, but and her family thinks I am Ty, at least, for kicking her out in a strange city alone when she was just being honest with me. Am I? Now, for the update. Sorry to everyone who reached out and I haven't responded. I honestly haven't been using the app as I had to change phones swiftly at one point and forgot the password when trying to log on my new device. It took Trent 2 weeks. I had a full-time job, but also a part-time service industry job as a bartender. He showed up at the bar. It's a small bar, and one of the regulars, Daisy F30s, is one of the folk I did confide in about Trent and Tammy. When Trent walked in, I happened to be chatting with Daisy, and she saw my reaction. She asked what was wrong, and I told her that it was Trent. She wasted no time and went to get my manager. Trent sat at the end of the bar, and I took my time checking in on my other bar guests until my manager, Heather F50s, came out with the other 2 bartenders, both M30s. Trent had already begun knocking on the bar, asking for service loudly, and I had been ignoring him. He got kicked out quickly and told that we can and do refuse service to him. I got texts from a new number saying it was Tammy and begging for me to answer. She called 4 times, and I didn't answer. She left voicemails with Trent, and one without all telling me that I was concerning them with my hatefulness. How I am alone in the world and that's not safe. Who would I turn to if someone broke into my home at night? Things of that nature and religious crap sprinkled in. I was still on the clock and Daisy suggested I stay at her parents'. I know her mom, who sometimes comes with her to the bar. At that point, I was shaken enough to take them up on it. Daisy's mom, Rose F60s, has been sweet enough to let me stay rent-free for as long as I needed, but I eventually moved in with one of the servers at the bar. She helped me look for legal representation, and I filed for a restraining order using screenshots I had emailed myself prior, old voicemails. And though we could not prove harassment on Tammy's end, Trent had said enough in the voicemails and messages he had sent that it qualified for a temporary restraining order. I am safe for now, and the hearing is in January. No one knows where I live currently, and I've shut down all social media. I've been NC with my family, as they've been pushing me to give my address so they can send Christmas gifts. But when I gave them a P.O. box Daisy is allowing me to use, they got angry. It wasn't an address, and that was suspicious enough for me not to trust them. It's strange, but I am slowly making friendships, and seeing a counselor helps with the stress. Trent is pretty much blacklisted from the square of bars where my bar is. Word gets around. I've not walked alone a single shift since, and that's my update. Not perfect, but I remembered my password when I was checking my email for any additional stuff to send to my lawyer and wanted to let every person concerned about me that I am okay. When this is resolved, I will try to update with more detail. Thank you for watching.